Maybe just like that Brady Bunch episode.
Going live now.
All right, we'll call the February 21st, 2022 meeting of Washington City Council to order. Please rise for moment of silence, followed by pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Byerly.
Here.
Councilmember Conklin.
Here.
Councilmember Missouri. Here. Councilmember Stevenson.
Here.
Councilmember Prinker.
Here.
Councilmember Morris.
Yes.
Mayor Long.
Here. Approval of the minutes of the February 7th regular meeting. Motion and a second. Any discussion on that motion? Call for the vote.
Councilmember Byerly.
Yes.
Councilmember Conklin.
Yes.
Councilmember Missouri.
Yes.
Councilmember Stevenson.
Yes.
Councilmember Prinker.
Yes.
Councilmember Morris.
Yes.
Mayor Long.
Yes. Public comments. Craig, the public comments of what we have listed here.
I had none submitted.
Okay. 4A, request from Sentimental Journey for use of the airport for the fly-in.
This is the annual request from Sentimental Journey to Cup Haven for not only the fly-in, which is June 21st through 25th this year, but also for the use of Hangar One for their pancake breakfast fundraisers, one in May and one in September.
What's the wish of council?
To approve the request.
A second.
Motion on the floor in a second. Any further discussion? Call for the vote, please.
Councilmember Byerly.
Yes.
Councilmember Conklin.
Yes.
Councilmember Missouri.
Yes.
Councilmember Stevenson.
Yes.
Councilmember Prinker.
Yes.
Councilmember Morris.
Yes.
Mayor Long.
Yes. 4B, request the use of Zindel Park Keller watershed for Dirty Dabbers Sport Bricks.
The Dirty Dabber Great Adventure National Dual Sports Series has requested use of the city authority watershed area around the Keller Reservoir, the Zindel Park area, this year for their race. This race did cause substantial damage to the property last year. And because of that, you've been provided some correspondence from the Nature Conservancy, which oversees the Forest Council's certification as a sustainable forest, and also the sale of carbon credits. Their correspondence, as well as correspondence from the administrator of the Lock Haven City Authority. In your decision-making, I'll let the Director of Public Works speak a little to this. He did include a narrative for council in their consideration as well.
Good evening, everyone. Casey and I met with the authority and Nature Conservancy and the Ridge Trail. I guess back in 2014, if some of you remember, there was a discussion about a Ridge Trail, but we'll get to that another time. During that time, we let the authority know about the Dirty Dabbers request, brought it up to them, and then the correspondence that you see attached to this council packet is what happened. Kevin Yoder from Nature Conservancy voiced his opinion and also stressed that we follow the legal ramifications of the forestry plan and the contract. The recommendation to council is to deny the request of the Dirty Dabbers for the use of Zindel Park and the Keller watershed areas as inconsistent with the forestry management plan and as it violates section 298-9 of the city code, which prohibits the use of motorized vehicles in recreation areas owned or under the control of the city.
I would, sorry, may I?
Yes, sir.
I've been up into that area twice, once in the, shortly after the Dirty Dabbers event, prior event, and again, late last year. And I don't know how long it's gonna take for that one area to recover. And I'm not happy with the fact that the repair they claim to have done was so poor. And I will not support this. As a matter of fact, I'm going to make a motion that we deny the use.
I have a motion on the floor. Let's go ahead and second. Motion and a second discussion.
Just a question, probably for Tony. Has anyone talked directly to the Dirty Daubers after all of this correspondence? I'm not saying I disagree with Councilman Conklin, I probably agree with them, but if no one then reaches out to the Dirty Daubers and says, hey, got this issue, you did repairs, they weren't good.
Tony, can you answer that question?
Since we received the response from the Nature Conservancy and the emo there, we haven't reached out to the Dirty Dabbers.
Is that a we have not?
Yes.
Okay.
When was the last race? Last year, right? What stretch, I'm assuming the Springs part, stretch that you're talking about that was not repaired? Are we talking?
It was a repair. It wasn't repaired very well.
Were we talking a road that's, half a mile long? Are we talking just a nature trail of some sort where the bikes are riding? Explain a little, because I haven't been out that section, so I don't know what it looks like.
Last year they went off the approved trail. That was approved,
The approved trail.
and they caused some damage. Frank Rohr, our watershed manager at the time, he's the one that pointed it out.
After the damage occurred, that was all. The entire trail through the city's property was all documented photographically before the race and after the race. After the race, a packet was put together showing the variance between the two, and sent to the Dirty Dabbers. It did take a couple months to get them to come around to make the repairs. The city has always implemented with them the special activity agreement, which does require them to make the repairs, or the city will make the repairs at their expense. They did come and make some of the repairs. They, depending on whether you're them or other people, they feel they did a very good job on the repairs. Other people feel they did not. So the Nature Conservancy, in their opinion, the repairs didn't restore it to the previous state. And so that could jeopardize the certification of the forest and the sale of carbon credits, as well as the timber.
How has the relationship been in the past?
No, I told them all the time that I've served
Was
with
last
council
year
over the
like
years.
a-
It's actually been pretty good.
Something,
But I'm surprised you said that they didn't go by the approved route.
Right, last year they did go, it's kind of one person went off route and then everyone behind them continued to do that. That caused damage. In a dry year, there really are next to no issues. In a wet year like last year and maybe 6 or 7 years ago, then there are significant erosion issues.
That was gonna be my comment too, is that it was a rainy year last year, and was it, Rick, when you saw it, was it just sections that were eroded other than the path itself that they're gonna use? That's
The only section that, I was on more of the section than that, but the section that's indicated on the map that they're supposed to be taping off this year, if it gets approved. That section is where I saw the damage that was along what it's primarily walking area now. It originally was more than just walking area at one time, but it's mostly just walking area, and it just was not done well. I mean, it was pretty, and I had somebody with me that hunts that area on a regular basis, and he made the same comments, that it just was not in very good shape. I guess my bigger concern is, and frankly, my bigger concern goes back to when this thing started, which was a long, long time ago. And I had a concern even then for putting that kind of vehicle, which by its nature causes erosion, into that watershed. But that was me, back then, that was before I had any say in any matter.
What did the city authority say?
It's in their letter.
What says it's a split vote, and I see Tony asked for, so did the authority go with you, Tony? They're saying, no, don't do this, or half the authorities, I mean, what's the?
They didn't make a vote. All I have is what's in that email.
All right, so they never got back to you and said, yeah, we voted and this is what we determined as a group.
Correct.
Okay,
Although Mr. Yoder with the Conservative Nature Conservancy, those guys are professionals, and you're never going to restore, I don't care if you run mules up through there, you're not going to restore it back to how they would like to have it. Being a wet summer and a time period for it, where there's sections of significant damage, I think communication should have been, it's not good enough, come back and fix it again. I think we should have exhausted all avenues to try to get them, because we want them to fix it. We want it to look better let it heal for the next year. And there is a route that we could proceed, and that goes with those agreements and the timetable of 30 days, and there's all the checks and balances that are there. So there is an avenue to give us special conditions. And I would like to see hundreds and hundreds of visitors and tourists coming here to ride and do their event. We turned away because we said no to something that we can fix. And I'd like to give another shot at it to make sure that they do fix it correctly. I don't want it torn up. They need better signs evidently, because I know if a hiker goes the wrong way, the other hikers are going to fly. And we know that from the races that we help with. So,
Yeah.
Well, I would be more inclined to give it a shot at it if the letter had said, we want to do this. Last year, we had a bit of a problem, but we showed up and we fixed it. They sent us a letter to say, we've always done this, there's no problem, we'd like to do it again. That's all for it.
Your issue is that you don't feel that they recognize that there was an issue last.
and actually, it looks like the same letter, except they changed the dates.
Right.
It looks like their standard form letter, so they didn't put any editorial into it like they should have maybe.
And I'm also going to agree with Rick that when we put 400 motorcycles over 2 days down a road that for the rest of the year, I assume does not see very much traffic at all, you're inviting problem. And I'm not entirely certain there's much merit in an event that tears up a road and people sign an agreement and they go and fix it. That seems to me to be
And
a waste of effort.
if I could, I'm going to be my own devil's advocate for just a moment, because that's
You did make the motion.
right, because I did make the motion. But the other issue, of course, is within a couple of years, that whole area is going to be tore up. And, because of the project. So, is it really detrimental? I guess from that standpoint, looking at it that way, which again, I always like to look at it from both sides.
That down already.
Right, I always like to look at it from both sides. In reality, that will be the area probably where the pond is built.
But it doesn't mean it makes it okay to go.
No, to damage it,
No.
that's exactly right.
Because they would still have to live by the agreement. It
Right.
looked like it had some teeth in it.
Yes, I think the agreement
So we
does.
can assure the authority and our nature conservancy that, to give them another shot at it.
We have a motion on the floor in a second.
Well, is there
to
a-
deny.
Is there a way that we could have a dry and a wet run? You know, if it's rainy that week and it's super wet, can they modify their course?
Well,
I mean, they're throwing this out years ago. State College allowed Penn State University to host their club, their Ultimate Frisbee Club on their fields. Well, that weekend it rained and they still hosted it. Hundreds of thousands of dollars of damage was done. You know, in retrospect, they probably should have said, you know, if it's raining, hold off for the following week. Is there a path that they could take that would be less wet? I don't know. I don't know. I have no idea. I'm looking at the map. And
yeah, when you walk Duck Road, that's just about the only way to get across.
Is that the path? Is that just the road up from the main road up to the dam there? Is
Yeah,
that what that
most
is?
of
It just
these-
goes up around.
Most of these with the double lines used to be haul roads for logging and they're, you know, wide enough. They're just not a small little skinny path. They were roads that were reclaimed and reseeded, you know, to,
So it's just,
but there's no way to get from left,
yeah, I don't even
left to
know where
right
I'm
here without cutting through city
Like
property.
if that's in the parking lot.
Yeah.
that kind of stuff, yeah.
The forestry, the state land has not been denied for them to run on.
Right.
And we're in the middle of everything. So if we deny it, there's no
So that's where they're cutting
no getting
across.
around us. They're going from state over to the other state.
Oh, so they're just cutting across then.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I have a motion on the floor in a second. Is there any further discussion, new information to bring to this?
And the motion is to
To
deny.
deny, the motion was to deny and seconded. Do we have any additional new information to have? Let's call for the vote.
Councilmember Byerly.
No.
Councilmember Conklin.
No.
Councilmember Missouri.
No,
Councilmember Stevenson.
No.
Councilmember Brinker.
No.
Councilmember Morris.
Yes.
Mayor Long.
No, so I guess the motion that you made failed.
Sorry.
Especially since you voted. I guess
Dan.
Stuff.
I,
Well, that's what
Okay.
the point of the discussion is though. So, all right, so that motion failed. Do I have a different motion?
I move we allow them with the restrictions and the agreement to be monitored, enforced, and more communications, and they need to put better signs and trailblazing and everything, so they stay where they're supposed to be, and all the things that go with. The eyes are upon them this year. Hopefully they have drier weather.
A motion on the floor. Do I have a second?
Second.
And a second. Any discussion on that motion? Yes,
I would just follow up to Councilman Stevenson's comments. I just think that it has to be made clear to the Dirty Daubers, you already had one significant violation. If you have it again, it's more than likely that you're gonna be done.
You've jeopardized.
So,
I
I
agree.
think
That
we
was-
think we need to make that clear.
Needs
I
to be
also
made
think that if the repairs last year were insufficient, that this year, if there are damages, that we say who is responsible to inspect and say that the repairs are sufficient? Whose job is that?
So,
Is that Public Works? Or,
well, Greg, can you answer that question?
I'll figure that out.
okay, I mean, I think it's important to know who's gonna follow up, somebody, needs to make sure that that happens.
So what I'm getting here is from the field of the discussion is that the motion is to let them do it, but that they need to be given some instruction ahead of time. The last time was not acceptable. And we expect them to do better this time. Is that basically what you're saying, Steve? Sure. In your motion? Doug?
Yeah.
Okay. Any further discussion on that? Call for the vote, please.
Councilmember Byerly.
yes.
Councilmember Conklin.
no.
Councilmember Missouri.
Yes,
Councilmember Stevenson.
Yes.
Councilmember Brinker.
Yes.
Councilmember Morris. Mayor Long.
Yes. You are very.
Well, I didn't hear my own question on the other side. I apologize for that. Well, it was just, sometimes stupid wins.
That's all right. All right, and you already said you didn't have anything else under public comments, right?
I know.
Okay. Unfinished business, public hearing on consideration of ordinance number 2022 -02. Property maintenance code. Cindy, how are you this evening?
Thank you.
This is the second reading of ordinance 2022-02, which has been properly advertised and available to the public. We asked for any comments or concerns to be forwarded in writing so that they could be answered to everyone. We did not receive any. The draft that's before you was produced by the subcommittee of council to work on this, as well as the city solicitor and the special counsel for property maintenance and code enforcement from Sullivan Hughes. So I'll turn it back to the code enforcement officer.
Thank you. Greg gave you a pretty good summation of what you have before you. I would just add that adopting the property maintenance code in its current form will now be applicable to not only the rental inspection program, but for overall property maintenance enforcement as well. And I will add the 2018 version that you have before you did implement into it the changes that were made by city council years ago that have been incorporated to the rental inspection program. So it's something that's been in place for that for the last 27 years.
Comments from members of council?
Has there been any changes at all since the first reading?
No.
None, okay. It would be easier to read it like a House bill if we knew what was crossed off and deleted and what was added. Because just reading this whole thing, I mean, it's good, but it was harder to decipher what was deleted and changed.
That's
And
what the subcommittee,
they did all
that's how
that.
they reviewed it.
Okay, now I'm satisfied with the final version. Just didn't know. what
Yeah,
maybe
the
something
subcommittee
was-
reviewed it in its
Okay,
regular form.
As a typical resident, the previous version would say things like adopt chapter 3 of the property maintenance code with the following changes, and then maybe 2 sentences. Well, the property maintenance code international is not available for free. So we were enforcing local rules and regulations on people, but not giving them those local rules and regulations. So in this version, it is completely typed out and available. So like all other ordinances, when something were to require a change, in the case of the International Property Maintenance Code, changes are made because of successful lawsuits against the code itself. So that's how they initiate new versions. So when those changes come forward, they just be a general ordinance like you're used to seeing, where you would now see, here's a paragraph, here's what's being crossed off, here's what's being added. Right now, we don't have an apple to compare it to because it just says, find a copy of the International Property Maintenance Code and turn to chapter 3. But that isn't something the typical resident has access to when all of the rest of our ordinances are available for free.
I might have missed where, if the international code changes, does ours mirror that then without us coming back and making changes also? Since we adopted what the code is,
This is not a required code
okay,
through the Uniform Construction Code that we adopt. So the property maintenance code is something, it's an at will. So we can adopt it. Bald Eagle Township, for example, doesn't have it adopted. A lot of municipalities don't have it adopted. We're not required to adopt it. So therefore, that's what gave us the levity to be able to change it the way we have. So we can incorporate the changes from the council's past, and we can make any additional changes that the subcommittee recommended or our council.
We can customize it.
Correct, correct.
Anything else, Steve?
no, I'd like to thank the subcommittee and all that have worked on it. I know it's That's a tireless job, because that gets pretty dry.
Yeah.
I've gone through all those things. Thank you. Did you go? Did you? Thank you. I'm glad you were-
Wonderful.
I'm glad you were on it.
The citywide enforcement of the most current property maintenance code and equitable enforcement thereof is one of the goals of the comprehensive plan identified by community residents in the process for Destination Lock Haven, which was done during 2020 and 2021.
Any other comments, council?
Yeah, it's more of a question because I was asked this question in the midst of the ice storming. The snow and ice removal is not part of this code, correct?
It is.
Well, I only found it one place, and it was under part 3, general requirements, under sidewalks and driveways. It does not, it doesn't give an amount or level unless it's listed a second place. In other words, if it's more than an inch of snow, if it's more than 2 inches of snow, if it's within 24 hours of the last snowflake, that kind of thing.
I think in its current form, the police enforce that now.
Right.
In its current form. And I believe, Greg, correct me if I'm wrong, if you know it off the top of your head, I think it is that the sidewalks have to be completely clear within 24 hours of the cessation of the storm.
Right.
So I don't think it lists
And
1
about,
inch, 2 inch, they have to be clear.
okay, and essentially that's what I told them, because I remember shortly after getting on council, getting a phone call at 5 o'clock in the morning from city police, reminding me, Mr. Conklin, you need to get out and get the ice off of it. Okay.
You sent Jackie right out, didn't you?
Well, I did. I was going to work that morning. I certainly went right out and got it. So that's why I told them that was the requirement. Now, in the midst of that terrible ice and snow, there were a number of what would have been violations that I'm sure weren't cited because it was difficult to remove. But, and I shared that with them as well. But anyway, okay, very good. Thank you.
Any other comments from council? Since we have no residents or property owners, unless you have any comments.
I am neither, so.
Did you receive any, Greg?
And what are you going to be?
So consideration of ordinance number 2022-02, second reading. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
And a second. Any further discussion before we vote? Call for the vote.
Councilmember Byerly.
Yes.
Councilmember Conklin.
Yes.
Councilmember Missouri.
Yes.
Councilmember Stevenson.
Yes.
Councilmember Brinker.
Yes.
Councilmember Morris.
Yes.
Mayor Long.
Yes. Any other unfinished business? All we do, the B, 5B. Continued discussion regarding the 2022 capital improvement program. That's what we have, these wonderful big cards.
They're great big giant worksheets. This is, excuse me, the next 6 years of the capital improvement schedule that every year gets updated and renewed by adding 1 more year out. And so you'll see a variety of projects on here. They include things like the parks, which are on a schedule for improvement. So you can see as those progress over time. You can also see some of the phases of Sunset Pines. There's a 4th phase, which happens in 2029. And that's obviously off here. I do actually have this through 2034. That's the end of the useful life of the current wastewater treatment plant. So we would need to start planning about 8 to 10 years before that, which is 2024 on its replacement. But that being said, I had pledged to council that we would put some discussion back on the agenda regarding city hall renovations, which a month ago we heard a presentation from Booth Horn about, and Obviously, it was the first time council was looking at that, and so wanted to give an opportunity for that to be digested. On the Fund 16 project worksheet, you'll see a pale blue color, and that denotes the use of the borrowing or the intended use of the borrowing for capital improvements of city facilities. So knowing now a much stronger figure, you can see that the balance of City Hall that would not be paid for if we were to use the borrowed proceeds, plus if we were fortunate enough to get a RACP from the Commonwealth, there would still be 1.6 million unfunded of that project right now. So that's why that goes into the fund balance, because we don't have another source of payment for that right now. I sent to council for its consideration with this feasibility study again, that, you know, the three options that kind of rose to the top internally as we were having discussions about how would we present to council that this could be accomplished. The first was to use the borrowing plus a RACP, which I just described. The RACP is a grant from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania Redevelopment Assistance Capital Program. Those are awarded and then funded. So it's two different processes. So the first part is not that difficult to get the Commonwealth to say, hey, that's a great idea. We would love for you to get $2.5 million. So then you're put into a chart that they think it's great that you would get 2.5 million. Then you actually have to get the 2.5 million out. So as the city planner included a memo of the more than $1 billion projects currently in RACP, only 28 million statewide have actually been funded. So the ratio of that is not tremendous. However, that would be one solution, is to use the borrowing plus RACP and find a way to come up with the other 1.6 million for City Hall. The second would be borrowing, perhaps a RACP as well, and then to ask Blue Car Horn to address how much could be reduced off of the total cost by the city hiring additional employees to do the labor in-house in order to save some money in having to have contractors do all the work. And the third is something that came to light when a investor from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania business approached myself and some other city staff members and made a proposal that they would be interested in building a city hall for the city to rent if the city were interested in pursuing that. That doesn't mean they're building it, and it doesn't mean the city is renting it. It's, would you be interested in pursuing that? So that's not something that I could pursue without council telling me that that's of interest to them. So that is the third option. That would mean the city wouldn't build the city hall. City would be a tenant of City Hall. It is likely the term of that lease would be the useful life of the building, which usually is between 25 and 30 years, depending on how long they choose to depreciate it, but there is a maximum depreciation of usually 30 years for a commercial building. But sometimes it can be as low as 17. It just depends on the type of building. So, in that scenario, I would have to do some calculations to see what the difference would be between the city expending that money itself plus annual maintenance for the number of years, to see if rent comes in significantly less than the city expending that money, which would then make it attractive to do that. If it came out the same, then it may not be an attractive proposal for the city to do that. But I really don't want to pursue one particular option without council giving some direction on which of the option, or which is the option they would most prefer we look at first.
It's such a big amount of money.
It is.
I think a couple of things, this is just my thoughts after the last time we talked about this. Number one, I think that we need to know, or I feel like I need to know, how much money has been spent on maintenance on this building, general upkeep and maintenance on this building over the course of the last, I'm gonna say 10 years. You know, what is the annual maintenance cost? What are we spending? And I don't just mean, you know, running the sweeper and things like that, but I mean, what kind of maintenance is being done, has been done here, and what has been paid for that? And to be able to think about that in that term. And then the debt service on that amount of borrowing, you know, what's the debt service on that gonna look like? And if we get some sort of a grant, what are the chances? Would we get the grant before we made a commitment? If we made a commitment, are we sure we're gonna get the grant? I mean, I don't see how we could commit to anything without having 100% certainty on the money. And I hear you saying that's not 100% certain. It could be 100% certain money at some point in the future. Well, that we couldn't. I couldn't. I don't know how anybody else feels about it, but I couldn't in good faith say, yeah, let's move forward with doing this and then not get that money. That's not an option. I mean, I just think there's a lot of questions about finances, how financially this would go. And then to rent a facility, I mean, how much is that going to be? You know, what would they be looking at as far as rent is concerned? What responsibilities as far as maintenance and upkeep would we be giving up? Would they expect us, you know, what kind of lease would we be looking at? Are we still going to be responsible to remove the snow, or are they going to remove the snow? Who's going to take care of the heating plant when it breaks down? Is the landlord going to do that, or is the city going to do that? You know, where does what happens with all of that? And what kind of, you know, I think there's a lot of questions for all of these things that need to be answered as far as I'm concerned.
I think that's what you're asking us, you know, where do we, is that something that we want to look into? For him to go ask, say, hey, would you like to draw this up, you know, and talk with them to be able to pursue that, because, you know, time is money. I had the same questions with maintenance costs here. You can do anything with money. It's really nice if we could just have an unlimited supply. I mean, it'd just be the ideal world. But the question always comes back to, you know, ultimately, what are we gonna want to invest in? You know, we could invest in here with $2.5 million. Give me correct. If we just use our 2.5 million that we already have set aside, we don't have to raise taxes. Am I correct with that?
Just did that.
Yeah, just put, I mean, that, so we would have that. We would have that here. What would 2.5 get us with our own contractors? I don't know. That's why I asked that one question: how much do we have leniency in this building? And our say of, well, what we want to get fixed. I'm not sure if we need to move the elevator or move the stairs, or, you know, rework the stairwell in the back and do the whole the basement like that was originally proposed. I mean, this room here could be the locker room. Female, male, come in that door, have a little branch off, shower, toilet.
Yeah.
And it's not gonna cost, you know, so my thought is, if we were to do, look at that aspect, what could we get away with? Would the 2.5 be equivalent to that versus the rent aspect? I don't know the answer to that.
I agree, and I think that we have to take into account the design that was given to us there was a combination of needs and wants
Yeah.
in it. And yes, this building has issues, it has warts, but we've been dealing with it like this for quite a while. We need to address them. It has been ignored. And does that mean that it all needs to be done? We told people in Sunset Pines, it's gonna take 5 years to fix what wasn't taken care of there. You know, can't do that overnight. What kind of plan can we put in to address the needs and some of the wants, if necessary, here over time? We don't have to have it all done tomorrow.
And one
It
of
would
my
be
other,
nice,
yeah.
but
one of my thoughts with that is, we know the current state we're in now. I've heard how long it's been since we should have had a roof. If we're gonna dump 2.5 million into this place, what avenues is the plan for council to guarantee that we're gonna continue to put maintenance costs back in the building so that our officers can take a shower? I mean, that's we should be good stewards all the way. I mean, that's what we're looking at here.
Yeah.
We're planning out good stewards. And just continuation of that and how that's gonna look. Or does it make sense if we're not going to allocate money? I don't know what the current maintenance budget is for the building. I know the windows, where we're at and all that stuff. Or does it make sense to go over there and rent and let them take care of it? And that will be our maintenance fee because we don't have to take care of the building. I mean, is that something that we want to commit to or not commit to? Because that is huge. I mean, if they're gonna take care of the building and we don't have to put the money into it and our rent fee is the maintenance cost. That's the other aspect I think we need to really consider.
like you asked for full.
Yeah, I, along with all the rest of the council, appreciate Greg putting that email together today. It was very good. Kind of gives us a little focus. Certainly a hard decision, but for me, I kind of lean toward, I think we need to get the information from a potential developer to see what we need to tell them what we want, see what they bring back. If it's worth further discussion, we have that discussion. If they say, hey, your rent's gonna be $20,000 a month or whatever, we can say, hey, thank you very much. We'll spend X here. We need to know that, as Barb said, and then we can clear a path. If we don't get that number, we're not really being good stewards to figure out, is that an option? I think the one thing that I'm sure everybody has thought of but hasn't mentioned yet, if we get out of the real estate business and the developer builds that building and we rent from them, that's a property that's back on the tax rolls that currently is not. I think we should also include in that if you're going to build that building and we move across the street and we rent from you for 30 years, you're going to buy this building too, and you're going to develop this and put this back on the tax roll.
I don't know that you're correct about that. If they're using it for renting it to us, we are the government, they may be tax exempt.
Well, then we need to know that.
You know.
We need to know that.
I mean, there's a university sitting up there with national restaurants and making money, but that's tax exempt. So.
And you could be correct, Mayor, and then we need to know that. But the potential, we're never going to be on the tax rolls. None of our properties are ever going to be on the tax roll. This may be a path where it could be on the tax rolls, and hopefully it would be. Because that would obviously benefit the city for the tax revenue that we would get for X amount of years that we're not ever going to get in the current situation.
There's a lot of pros and cons of every which way. I can understand why you're asking for direction to go. If we would rent from somebody else developing, that would preclude us from having to hire a whole crew of people to do the renovations and pay the rate and relocate for a year probably while they're rehabbing this city hall. And if you put $6 million into a building, you still have an old building. And I would rather see it sold and back on tax rolls to somebody else also. So there's a lot of different angles, and it's just somebody savvy needs to analyze, and it's just not the maintenance bills of this. I think if I remember the study, the utility bills for here would be about the same almost as the building of the new one. So that's almost a wash. But you have to think of the environment of your employees and and just everything else that their working conditions and things that they have to put up with every single day. The rates are gonna go up because the feds are gonna raise the interest rate. So we don't need to decide by next week, but sooner the better. If we do have to borrow some more as a bridge loan to get us over to the funding area, then we would want a better rate or a shorter term too.
I would caution council, any additional borrowing that would be used towards City Hall would be very difficult to do, because we need the open amount that the city can borrow as interim financing for the dam project.
I agree. I do that too.
Yeah, as everybody knows, we're kind of stating the obvious here. We're in a difficult situation. One, we have a 100-year-old building that we need to renovate or build new. That's a big enough project on its own. You have these other projects that were not of our choosing, that are forced upon us, that we can't afford, but we've got to do anyway. So we're going to spend $20+ million on them and then hinder this project that we really do need. That really puts us in a difficult position of no one's creation. So
Did we help you, Greg?
No.
Did the water any money?
I think what they're saying to you, Greg, is that they would like to have
All options
information
explored.
on what that would be.
Well, Greg, I think honestly, I mean, like you just said, I think it comes down to really money and how are we going to afford this and what can we legitimately afford? I mean, realistically, within the confines of the budget that we have to operate within, the idea that I think I heard we're not going to be able to go out and borrow all this money. That's not going to happen. And so, the idea that we've got $2.5 million, well, okay, again, what you want to put that here? I mean, is that really where we want to go with the 100-year-old building and start out with $2.5 million project that may or may not ultimately, you don't know how many big projects you get yourself involved in, but nothing ever goes according to plan. Everything always costs more than you thought it was going to, and something inevitably comes up. Once you start tearing apart here and doing stuff here, it will be, I don't know. I just feel like we really need to look at the option, I think anyway, let's talk seriously about the possibility of what a developer might charge us and what they'd be looking at, and some terms about that. I think that it'll be easy to get information about how much money is going to cost us and what can we get for $2.5 million. I mean, how much? I think we know how much a roof on this building is going to cost. And we have other things that absolutely have to be done. The police department stuff has to be done. The showers and that has to be. So I mean, there are some things that I don't think are, there's some things I don't think we're able to wait on.
Well, we'll get some different people looking into each of the options a little more and come back to you. We still talk about obviously capital, which are the enormous worksheets through the end of March, when by the third class city code, that budget needs to be adopted. But the city hall is not necessarily a Fund 16 standalone or portional project. It is a standalone obligation that is large enough that it doesn't have to be included in the CIP in the same way that some of the things worth $7,500 need to be included.
But I don't want to see it pushed back either. I don't want us to say, okay, well, we're just going to table this for another year or 2 years. We're going to make it somebody else's problem down the road, because that's, I mean, the can has been kicked as far down the road, I believe, as you can do it.
I'm just saying that the deadline to make that decision doesn't have to be the same as the entire capital improvement. So you could decide in June or July what way you want to go, or even later if you so chose. But it doesn't have to be part of this packet. The same is true of Sunset Pines. That's coming from a different fund. That's why it's on your worksheet in gray. That's liquid fuels money. So in the final adoption, that wouldn't appear on here, but it's so that you understand the number of projects that are going on. There's more too.
My sheets are very helpful.
I will explain one item that appears in the general fund, the water and sewer fund. So with the help of our city's GIS tech, John Hart, who for years has been working on calculating the number of miles of water line and sewer line and stormwater. And with the help of Gwen Dobson and Foreman, we've included for the first time this year, numbers that are not written in stone, but to give you an understanding of to replace the entire stormwater system of the city over the course of 30 years. Not all at once, but over 30 years, which is the storm sluices and drains and curbs and gutters, would be $1.4 million a year. And that would be to spend $1.4 million a year for the next 30 years, after which you would be back at the place of beginning and should be starting over, because that's the life expectancy of the infrastructure. In water, I did include that dollar amount as well, which is $2 million a year. And in sewer, I included that dollar, which is $1.1 million a year. So as council requested, we'll start talking about the results of the stormwater management fee proposal that council asked Gwen Dobson and Foreman to work on and put together. They're ready to present that at the second meeting in March. So that's when we'll begin to have a discussion about that 1.4 million and how is that affordable and what's a better jumping off point. Obviously you can't start on day one all in, but you know, what is the point that council would be comfortable? After that, we're going to move on and start a discussion in May about the water fund. So we'll have the same kind of discussion. What's a comfortable place that you would be able to get to, with an understanding that over time that would have to build in order to continue to do replacement of the aged out infrastructure. And then after we're done with water, we'll move on to sewer and get those basic user fee budgets done earlier than when we usually start them in November, so the council has really a lot of time to delve into those budgets. So just to summarize, we are not spending $1.4 million a year. But that's a realistic cost of what it would be over time to completely replace the system in 30 years.
But if I might, I'm just gonna add my 2 cents here, not the 1.4 million. But that's the kind of thing that we should, as a city, have been looking at all along, because that's the infrastructure that runs the city. Whether or not we can operate with, which is why 14 and a half years ago, when I got on council, I started pushing for a roads plan, which we have kind of in place now.
So I would point out the hidden benefit of investing in these line refurbishments and repairs and replacements is that a lot of these are under paved streets. So that requires these utilities, which if you think of stormwater as a kind of utility, everyone would have to pay their fair share. This would result in a much larger visible paving being done in the city, because you would see water, sewer, and stormwater subsidizing that paving. If all three are located in the city, it would actually not cost the city to pave. They each have to pay a third of ripping up the road. So in the end, you would get a much superior project. And get paving done, but paving just isn't listed. But it is the side.
So where do we even remotely? I know it's need, major need, but where do we find funds?
That's what we'll discuss.
I know, I'm like,
Welcome.
Yep, that's what we'll discuss.
no, I like, the easy ones like this dirty dabbers. I want more dirty dabbers.
There are meetings that are like that. This is what it's like on the other side of the desk.
Well, and I think we need to keep on this, though. I think these are the kind of things that we really need to continue to keep in front of us so that we don't forget or don't let something get talked about, discussed, we move forward, and then for something else comes along and we lose sight of it. So I really appreciate that we're working on this in this fashion. I think it's a good step forward.
In the city's defense, it is by law structured for the fourth and first quarters to be pretty grim. And the second and third quarters to be pretty happy and delightful. So for your benefit, because you're new, we'll spend the second and third quarter on some more grim stuff. Just as a first year initiation.
Thank you, appreciate that.
But yeah, normally second and third quarters are relatively light with business, but most of the expenditures that are discussed are in the fourth quarter and with capital in the first quarter. And we started the process a few years ago of basically allocating a full dollar amount in the budget in the fall to these special project funds. And then in the spring is when you decide, here's how we're going to allocate out that for this year. The important thing to remember, as Councilmember Stevenson will always point out, is if there's no cash, nothing happens. So the fund may have $587,000 in the bank today, but looking at the future and seeing some things where you see anything that is unfunded with 100% grant funding, let's say, is falling into the fund balance category. And a good example of that towards the bottom is $254,000 in 2025. We don't actually have a funding source on the horizon right now for any Triangle Park reconstruction. So that falls into fund balance. Now, that's also not in this year's. So that's why we do the plan every year, is to make an adjustment of when something could take place.
Any other great news, Scott?
I had no other delight to bring before council on that topic.
Okay,
Could I just take us back to City Hall?
you really have to.
I do. I really do. Greg, you sent us a note that said, here are three possible options. We do not have the resources to evaluate all three. So please tell us what you would like us to do. We just said to you, we would like you to evaluate all three.
Mhm.
Is that your understanding?
Yes. I will ask Scott how much it will cost for Burkhardt Horn to tell us what we would get for $2.5 million. I will make sure we reach out to the developer and get some more detailed information from him. And I'll have some better figures for you on what we spend on general maintenance and upkeep over the last 10 years. I would just highlight that's just maintenance. Light bulbs. We don't paint anything, we don't, obviously, but we don't change out windows or anything like that. So it is probably the largest expense was changing 2 doors on the downstairs, which were glass, which after we did security training, you shouldn't have glass doors in a governmental building. So we changed those out with wooden doors. And then we built a kind of window in the treasurer's office because we had a pre-COVID, very large problem with people just walking in and walking back to the desks of the finance clerks while they have money and stuff that saying, I want to pay my water bill, so build a counter there to stop that. So that would be the only kind of investment we made in infrastructure in the building. The rest is all just going to be utility bills.
Sure, and the thing has been put into this building, so they put the elevator in the front of the building, but storm windows on.
Yeah, the storm windows were in the
If
80s.
a light bulb burn out or something broke, they fix it. But
And the developer didn't give us any clues as to what it would cost us to rent.
The meeting was actually about a different topic.
All right.
And so they brought that up towards the end. And I said I would bring it before council and see how they felt, because I don't want to explore something that you're not directing me to explore.
I did look at their link that you showed. They have some nice buildings with the hospitals and the work looks very quality.
hey, Richard, you done with that now?
You want me to be done with that?
I'm coming out of my depression now.
I could go on.
No, thanks. Thanks for coming.
I could tell you what I.
New business, 6A, consideration of resolution number 2022-07.
As part of the lawsuits that the city either joined in part or in whole with other municipalities and sometimes individually, one of the entities that the city was suing because of the opioid epidemic was Collegium Pharmaceutical. It's a relatively small company that has agreed to enter into settlement. There were actually only 27 entities that had entered a lawsuit against Collegium. The city's net amount will be just around $6,000, because again, this isn't a large companies. But after discussion with the special counsel that the city has retained for that project, they do think this is the best chance for the city to get some funds out of that. And so my recommendation is that council authorize the resolution to have me sign the settlement agreements with Collegium Pharmaceutical.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
I second.
Motion floor is second. Any further discussion? Call for the vote.
Councilmember Byerly.
Yes.
Councilmember Conklin.
Yes.
Councilmember Missouri.
Yes.
Councilmember Stevenson.
Yes.
Councilmember Brinker.
Yes.
Councilmember Morris.
Yes.
Mayor Long.
Yes. 6B, final inspection by the PUC.
After being in use for several years, the Pennsylvania PUC came to do a final inspection of the railroad tracks of CEDACOG that go across East Walnut Street at the new entrance to First Quality. And the results of that are included in your packet.
Any comments, council, on that? Okay. 6C, DCNR timber sales.
The Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, Travis DeLuca, who's the forester for Bald Eagle State Forest, sent a letter notifying the city of the area that they will be having some timbering done. That's in the vicinity of the Macohaton Reservoir, not exactly adjacent to, quite a bit down the road, but out of courtesy, they sent us the letter because it's within the watershed area. So I reviewed that. I didn't see anything from a city perspective that would have any impact. So I did respond in a letter that's provided to council. I also directed the same correspondence to the Lock Haven City Authority and notified the forester that the city authority would comment if they had any questions or concerns, because they timber, but not in that particular area. I don't believe timbering is happening in that area next year, but their forester can confirm that to DCNR.
60, PennDOT notice 2022 paving.
And the Director of Public Works is here to discuss the next phase of paving by PennDOT in the municipality.
Okay, I had a phone call conversation with Gary Bollinger from PennDOT to discuss their paving project for 2022. PennDOT plans in the city to pave Church Street, which is State Route 150, from the 5-way intersection to Henderson Street, and continue on Henderson from Church to Main, and then continue out Main to the Constitution Bridge. They also plan to pave North Fairview Street and Susquehanna Avenue. That would be from Bellefonte Ave all the way to Sugar Run Road. And then I've included some additional paving that are outside of the city in the description and the map. Public Works will need to adjust the manholes as they are doing a section of a 2-inch additional fill towards the Constitution Bridge.
Questions? Thank you, Tony. 6E, notice of community meeting for input for the refurbishment of Homeland Park Skate Park.
Let the Community Life Director speak to that a little bit.
We had over 200 responses to our survey that we put out regarding the skate park, so we were really excited. We had a lot of, I think it was almost all positive feedback, some really good input for the skate park. And so American Ramp Company will be assisting us in an in-person community feedback meeting on March 15th from 5 to 7, and that will be at the YMCA here in town. So we encourage all community members to come out and give us even more feedback, to meet the company and just discuss that design.
Is that in the gymnasium or?
I believe it's in one of the meeting rooms.
Okay.
If you look at the bottom design, now these aren't like the proposed designs for the city, but if you look at the bottom one, when I first saw it, I thought, well, if skateboarding ever is unpopular, it can become a city pool really easily. But I do like the new designs that they are mostly below ground, so that they don't require the fencing that we currently have. But it is nice to see that, and I know Abby and Casey have both been in contact with or are contacting 2 different foundations that help fund skate parks.
And this, we're hoping it will be a multi-use park, so BMX and inline skating as well. So we keep saying skate park, but mostly like,
The finger.
maybe we'll put a table in there for that as well.
Any other questions about that?
I appreciate the flyers at the high school. They're all over the place. A bunch of my students and asked if they filled out the QR code yet and did it. So a bunch of them were getting on and
Awesome.
doing it. So yeah, thank you for doing that.
Any other new business, Craig?
I had none, Your Honor.
Okay, so you have an FYI.
These are 2 just reports, well, 1 letter, 1 report. Every year, the city is required to submit or update the municipality report of elected and appointed officials. That was updated in January, so I sent that to you. It actually gets updated throughout the year when changes are made. But I usually give you all the other DCD submissions and thought I might as well include that one. So you have some other people's contact information and know who the chair of the planning commission is, for example. And then the other is just the notification from the economic partnership, thanking the city for renewing its annual membership in the partnership.
Anything else?
I had no other business to bring before council.
Does anyone else have anything to bring before council this evening? Real quick, concert committee, the meeting, we're in the thick of all that, and it looks like partnering town and local business is going to be a pretty busy summer this year. Looking forward to all the activities that we have downtown. Casey, thanks for all your hard work dealing with all of us all the time. So hopefully a few weeks we'll be bringing back kind of a schedule of where things are going to be.
The event that was Sip and Shop, Sip and Shop was awesome. It was very, very nice, very well done, and lots of people downtown for a Friday night. It's very nice.
My parents came 3 hours to go to it, and they don't drink, but.
They do now. Oh, wait, no, that
But-
was.
But they came down because a lot of people know, my family moved here when I was in 10th grade. I went to senior high school here. And when I went to senior high school here, a lot of the stores that people are nostalgic about were still open downtown. And my parents moved away in 92, I think, back up to Northwest Pennsylvania. And so ever since downtown's been booming, we are one of their favorite places to go. They used to love to go to Lancaster and Lewisburg, but now they really love coming back to Lock Haven, and not just because I'm here, but they always want to go downtown and go shopping, so that's great. It was a fun event, though.
It really was very nice.
Anything else? Do I have a motion to adjourn?
You did.
We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.